Hi everyone, this is your Hub podcast through Ask Zoe, and this is episode 30. So if you are listening on Spotify or watching on YouTube, hello, do make sure you are subscribing to our channel so you can keep in touch with all of our experts and up-to-date business topics to help move your business forward in 2024. As you know, the podcast has been running for the past 2 years, as it is our incentive and mission to help as many people as possible in business. So the topic of conversation this month is personal brand and follow-up that we mentioned in last month's webinar. And the reason for that, guys, is because you guys told me that you need to show up more in business and you need to convert more ultimately. You need more help in that follow-up. So we thought today's speaker was the expert when it comes to personal brand and looking at your brand identity. And that is Claire from Studio 37. So Claire, would you like to just introduce yourself and your business to our listeners, please?
Yeah, sure. Hi, everyone. I'm Claire and I'm from Studio 37. I'm based in Leeds and I'm a graphic designer and illustrator. I do a lot of branding with people, rebrands to make their business stand out a little bit more or align with their customers more. And yeah, I work with like small to medium businesses mostly. So yeah,
Yeah.
thank you.
She definitely does that, and she's a fellow Yorkshire businesswoman. So, as you know, we are very much championing small businesses and local businesses as well throughout our community. So, I just thank you for taking the time to come and speak to those we are working with, but also our experts that can all learn from your expertise. So, I'd love to ask you, as the brand expert, Claire, what is personal brand to you? If you was to work with a client and they was to say to you, somebody's told me to work on a personal brand, Claire. What is that? Professionally, what does personal brand mean in the brand and marketing space?
So I guess like branding to me is like the look and feel of the business and like how the business's personality does what you want it to do. So it may well be when we're talking about a personal brand, um, if you want it to reflect your own personality and who you are and what values do you want to get across in your business. They're usually, to be fair, our personal values anyway that we have in life. So it's not really that difficult to like look at that sort of thing. But also if you're a business who wants to like grow into something quite big, then you might have a different type of look and feel, like personality to your business.
Mhm.
Something that is less about you personally and more about the actual business as a like entity by itself.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
agree. And the reason I wanted to ask that question is because some of the resistance with personal brand for me when working with businesses is what is it? And how I best try to explain that is, you have to decide yourself going into business whether you want to be a personal brand or a brand of your business. And what I mean by that is I am Ask Zoe, but I was Fab Events and I was Fab Events and Marketing Strategies during the pandemic. But everybody knew me as Zoe, who you would come to if you needed help, support, and advice. Hence the reason of the rebrand of Ask Zoe. So even though it's not Zoe Wadsworth Consultancy, it very much for me is my personal brand. It's how I wish to represent myself to my ideal customer and also those within my network and my market. Do you find that resistance too when you do approach, putting the personality, within the brand? Do you find that resistance from your kind of key clients as well?
I do sometimes, yeah. It depends. I think it depends on like how you like to work with people and like
Mhm.
where you get your customers from as well. So obviously like we do a lot of networking. So like clearly you are your brand. People want to work with you and like use your expertise. Whereas if you were a company selling things to an end user and you were posting online and things like that, then your branding would probably look different to attract the people who are like
Mhm.
they're not looking to work with a business, they're just looking to buy a product or whatever it may be.
Yeah.
Yeah, I guess so. Yeah, some people are a little bit like resistant to having their branding about them. It can be a
Hmm.
weird, like, kind of uncomfortable thing. And
Hmm.
certainly, like, working on the actual branding with someone, if it represents them, it's like becomes so like personal that
Yeah.
you really need to like certainly work with someone on that that you really
Hmm.
feel like you have a good connection with,
Yeah.
line with, so they can understand who you are and how you want to come across.
Yeah, I agree. And it's about that representation, isn't it? Representing yourself in the right way. Because another kind of hesitation and objection I get when I talk about personal brand to customers, because I try to encourage it because I believe people buy from people, whether you've got the brand and you've got the logo, or you're just starting out and you're trying to find your feet within your market. And people will say to me, but I don't want to share War and Peace, Zoe, or I don't want to put my face out there to the audience. I want it to be very much about, logo and, about the product. And like you've said, Claire, more of the e-commerce style businesses, that would work, but take a global brand, for example, or a UK brand. Do we know who that CEO is? And the majority probably would say, like Utility Warehouse, for example, a national UK brand. Yes, because it fits with their values. However, Apple, do we actually think of and visualize that person, or do we visualize the product? It's very much for me, I believe, about that end game and, just sharing parts of the personal brand that align with the customer but align with your values as well. Would you agree with that, in terms of that hesitation and that block? It comes down to your business ultimately, doesn't it? In reference to what is appropriate, but also that you're willing to share.
Yeah, totally. Yeah. I mean, yeah, you kind of like I don't know, it depends whether you see your business as something like a separate entity to yourself, I suppose. But yeah, I mean, you can definitely like make it come across in whatever way you want, and
Hmm.
what part of yourself and what you offer people is the priority, really. Like, figure out what you want people to feel when they work with you, and therefore what they want you to feel when they look at your brand. Like, do they want to feel like supported, trusted, like, what element is it that you like want to prioritize and bring out in your branding? Because obviously there's so much to a person and to a business that you don't want to like overcomplicate it by being like, I am all these things. It's kind of like an overarching like
Yeah.
thing that you're trying to get across.
Yeah.
Yeah, but yeah, totally. I mean, the big brands, we don't know who the people are behind it. But it's different to like where small businesses, like, we want to work.
Mhm.
I don't know about you, but I like working with small businesses where,
Yeah.
I do know who is running the business, and I do know whose life has been, you know, bettered by using that business.
Yeah.
Many,
Yeah.
many people.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I agree because I mean, in my like business landscape, the majority I work with are independent businesses. But like, for example, there's a local company in our area, quite actually a large national company. And the brand is very predominant, but I know the CEO lives and breathes that brand. So actually his personal brand complements because he's not sharing everything, he's sharing, what represents the brand values. And he communicates that through his personal brand, so that synergy's there. And I suppose it really comes down to, Claire, like you mentioned, that landscape, doesn't it, in terms of how you're trying to represent yourself, but also what you're trying to attract, and
Yeah,
ultimately who you are as a person, and ensuring that comes across in different ways.
yeah, yeah. Making sure you understand who your ideal client is. Although I feel like a lot of people, when they describe their ideal client, it's often very similar to who they are anyway, if that makes
Yeah.
sense. Like, unless you've got a business that's like really specific to and like a proper niche audience or whatever,
Hmm.
I feel like when you get people to describe their perfect client as in like personality, it's often very similar to yourself. It's like who aligns with you. So
Yeah.
yeah, I do think your brand, it's important to like have some of yourself in that.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. So, a few of our listeners may be thinking as we're talking, well, what is personal brand and how can you best demonstrate that? Can you give some top examples of, areas of the branding that they can share their personality on and push, that message for their personal brand? Are there kind of some key staples that you recommend?
I mean, like everything kind of represents your personal brand. I'd say, like, when using your branding in terms of like the visuals that you're putting out,
Hmm.
definitely to make sure it's consistent with like fonts and colors. Like, I think, the amount of times a graphic designer will design a brand for someone and then they'll take it forward and they'll put the logo on something, but it's completely different. It looks completely different to the rest of the branding. Like the
Yeah.
colors and the fonts are different, and you just kind of think, well, it's okay, but it's not gonna like keep that brand in people's minds if you're
Hmm.
putting it out slightly differently each time. Like,
Yeah.
just not going to strengthen the brand because people, I mean, especially if you're posting on like social media and stuff, people look at things so fast. If they
Hmm.
don't recognize that as you, the separate posters that been the same brand, then
Yeah.
it's not gonna keep in the minds, which is what posting on social media is all about.
Yeah.
Um, but then also keep into consideration everything you do. So like the tone of voice, like if you want to use a copywriter to help you with the tone of voice,
Yeah.
that can be really important of how to communicate with people.
Hmm.
Even photography, if you're gonna
Hmm.
if you can get a photographer to do some like images for your brand that aren't just stock images, that makes such
Yeah.
a powerful difference
Hmm.
in how it comes across to people.
Yeah.
Uh, yeah, everything really, everything you put out is kind of quite important.
It is. It's about that consistency,
Uh,
isn't it? Because I'm glad you said photography, because that's what I would say is one of my key top tips that I share with everybody. Stock images are great, they serve a purpose, but there's nothing more powerful than people seeing the person behind the brand, if obviously appropriate, subject to what your business is. Some charities, it's not appropriate, subject to, their story and their background, but B2B, small independent businesses doing B2B professional services, it does tend to be appropriate. And I think the photography, speaks volumes, such as video as well. And just making you sure you're representing yourself authentically and how you wish to be perceived by the general public, i.e., your ideal target audience. And this is a prime example I share with somebody that's on my roller banners in terms of a stat when I worked for him. And it's a gentleman called Dan Holmes. Met him through For Networking, which is the network that myself and Claire met on. And he was known as the insurance guy. However, everything in his marketing didn't say that. It very much said Dan Holmes, the insurance broker. Now, if you know Dan Holmes and you're listening to this, you know he's gone on a journey himself and he's really doing well with Utility Warehouse at the moment. So this is really at the start of his journey before that kind of catapulted and took off. And we were doing a strategy together, and I said to him, if you didn't know who you were or what you did, if you looked at your profiles right now, where is Dan Holmes, the insurance guy? And it wasn't, it was Dan Holmes, the brand of the insurances that he sells. And one of the things like he decided to change instantly was that personal brand image. And he worked with a recommendation I put him in contact with. They had a great shoot again and used lots of photography. And to be fair, he may still use them now because they were for him. Yes, it was Dan Holmes, the insurance guy, but it was Dan Holmes, in reference to what he does now. Is Dan Holmes, one of the youngest senior group leaders, in the network. So he's done very well for himself. But my point is the personal photography enhanced the personal brand. It shared the message better, with the branding that he got from someone who, again, we fellow now, Al Price. It's about that level of consistency and best representing you as a business. So, on the devil's advocate of that, Claire, is there anything you would say not to share as a business owner when it comes to personal brand? Because a lot of people can share warts and all, and I always say each to their own. If it resonates with your audience, absolutely fine. But is there a line, drawn that you would say, yeah, don't go below that?
It's an interesting one, isn't it? Because as you say, like being authentic, you mentioned there is like so important. So some people will share quite personal stories and stuff, and like that does get people talking, and people will connect with it. So
Yeah.
it's really kind of down to you as to whether we want to draw that line on like what you
Mhm.
share with your clients. And as we know, we work with people we like. So if we get on with people in like a
Mhm.
friend kind of way, then we're probably likely to work with them as well if we know them from the business network.
Yeah.
Um, but I mean, I think one thing is like I'd say in terms of like graphics and stuff like that, just because I'm a graphic designer, like just be careful of like sharing things that are like say really bad, and like photographs as well, they're really bad quality. I think
Yeah.
like they're so low quality that you can't like read the text, or and they look really fuzzy, pixelated, like or you don't have having nice business cards at an event I think is important, like if you're giving out like
Yeah.
scraps of paper with your name on or whatever. I think
Yeah.
it you might, I mean, don't get me wrong, you might really get on with that person and be like, actually, I still like, I totally want to work with them. But I think
Mhm.
there's like, it is kind of like your shop window. And I think if you can give something out that's a bit more professional, it shows that you do kind of care and you have put effort into like what you're doing, which is
Yeah.
what people want. They want you to put effort into working
Yeah.
with them at the end of the day. So,
Well,
yeah.
it's about that representation, isn't it? And, representing your best self through personal brand, through your logo, through your graphics, all the way through to your print. People buy from people, but if you're not best, representing yourself, that's the missing piece. It's finding that missing piece in terms of representation, because we've seen the good, we've seen the bad, and we've seen the ugly, within our professions. I'm sure you'll agree, Claire. And like something that I'll say about personal brand or language when we're putting our brand out there and our graphics and design, make sure that resonates with your audience. I.e., if you are, a business wishing to attract professional services, using proper English is, going to attract rather than using slogan or curse words or swearing in your videos, for example. It's about that overall consistency and that overall brand presence. If it fits, great. If
Yeah.
it doesn't, not so much. It's about, creating that impact. Would you agree?
Yeah, definitely. No, you're right with like yeah, it's again, it's like you can have a tone of voice that's slightly more informal if that's the sort of brand that you have and that's the sort of people you want to work with. But
Yeah,
it probably is a line that's drawn where it's like also reread what you've put and make sure there's not loads of like just glaring areas, or it's not in like text speak or something weird. Like that would,
yeah,
I think that would come across as unprofessional. So yeah, I think yeah, I totally agree.
yeah, 100%. So, if you're listening to this in terms of our members and we're giving you food for thought, in reference to your own business and your own brand and how you're representing, your best self, um, could you give one example of how you've done that in your business to demonstrate how you kind of live and breathe, graphics, design, and branding, which is the offer that Studio 37 provides?
I think like how I represent myself, I think well, there's definitely improvement I can make in terms of like social media because I'm just pretty useless at posting on it. But I think when I do my posts are like, relatively strong in terms of like how they look and stuff like that. But I certainly like my website and my like printed materials. So I've got like quite fancy business cards printed that are like
Mhm.
quite like they're in a unique shape and they're like super thick, and like yeah, they're quite nicely printed.
Mhm.
But then the way that I work with people, we try and look at like different ways that you can attract audiences and keep people engaged, that kind of
Yeah.
thing. I have to say, I'm like I'm better at working on other people's stuff than I am on my own, which I think is like probably the same for like every graphic designer out there. Like,
I think it's the same for every profession.
probably.
Yeah, definitely. We're moving into for August talking about, creating your plan for the next 90 days so you can hit the ground running in September. Obviously, that is something that we offer in a strategy day. It's something we offer on a 12-month basis for retainers. It depends obviously on, what the customer needs. But somebody said to me, which is Lewis from Bar Creative, he looks after our website and our landing pages, and he said, when was the last time you sat down and did it for yourself? And truly, honestly, the last time I did that was at a rebrand. My rebrand is 3 years old, coming up this year because we get busy.
Yeah,
It's like I always explain to my customers, it's been on the hamster wheel, but when do you get off and work on yourself?
yeah,
Because you're too busy serving your customers, all the time. But what I would say about yourself, Claire, is your personal brand does come through because I've seen it for one, if somebody's asking for a graphic designer, in your field of expertise. I know the businesses that you like to work with because I've seen your presentations, I've seen your foresights, your speaking engagements. And I've got a good idea and a good picture on what is the best fit for you for a client. So that's your personal brand as well. So you are living and breathing it, even though you may feel
yeah,
you're not. And it's something that I encourage everybody to do. If you can share your view and your opinion to an engaged and listening audience, that's really powerful. Like it's really powerful because you're creating that impact firsthand. You're seeing that light bulb switch on firsthand, and you should have somebody in the room that resonates to a degree where they come up to you and say, can I have more information? I really enjoyed your story, or I know somebody who I think could really work well with you. Would you, really positive, follow-up conversations, which ultimately is what the month of July is all being about. How can you show up more in your business, and how can you make sure you're following up as well through that personal brand as well? Well, thank you for your time. I'm mindful. We like to keep our webinars short and sweet, and podcasts as well, to make sure they're engaging as possible and you get jam-packed full of information from our experts. So if anyone who's listening to this, Claire, and thinking, yeah, I like the vibe of Studio 37, I feel like I could do with, or even, find it beneficial to have a one-to-one with Claire right now for my business, what would you like our listeners and those subscribe to our channel to do next?
So feel free to get in touch with me. You can email me at Claire at studio-37, which is a number, .co. There's no UK or anything. Yeah, drop me an email or find me on LinkedIn or whatever. And I'm more than happy to have a non-obligation free 30-minute sort of brand review to have a look at what you're doing now and see if anything can be improved or strengthened.
Mhm.
Yeah, or just a general chat. I love meeting business people, do a lot of networking. So I've got a lot of connections and stuff. Yeah, so if you just want to catch up, that'd be grand. Thanks.
Amazing. So, guys, do reach out to Claire if you'd like a review or you'd like to get to know Claire's business a little bit further. Again, fellow Yorkshire women in business, available to help you, our members, and also the listeners through our YouTube and Spotify channels. So, just the last reminder to ensure you are subscribing to keep up to date with over 60 hours worth of resources, both on the webinars and the podcast within the hub. The month coming ahead is all about the 90-day plan to making sure we are gearing up for the second half of the year. So stay tuned for episode 31 coming in the next couple of weeks. And we look forward to catching up with you all soon. If you have any comments or feedback on this podcast, please comment below or within the Hub community, because you guys get the first sneak peek. So I hope you've enjoyed it, and thanks again, Claire, for joining us, and thanks for listening.